Good Tov. We are on the bottom of Samach Gimel Amud 63b3. We're going to go back to a brisa that we read yesterday because it is going to be the catalyst for a bit of a discussion. So Tani Kavas Rapapa yesterday told us that it's not only the Kohen who goes ahead and slaughters the Korban Pesach who owns chametz, who is going to be liable, but even the Kohen who goes ahead and brings the limbs, the parts that have to be brought to the Mizbeach, even if that Kohen owns chametz, he's also going to be liable. Let's take a step back. Remember, there is a prohibition against owning chametz while you are engaged in the Korban Pesach, okay? So that is true not only for the person who it is being brought on behalf of, but also the Kohen who is involved in the slaughtering, and also, as Rapapa told us, the Kohen who is involved in putting the imurim, the parts on the Mizbeach. Okay, so here's the brisa that supports Rapapa's opinion. Rapapa's an Amora, and this brisa is from an earlier generation. So let's see. Tanik Basder Papa Hashochet is Pesach al Chametz. If a person slaughters the Pesach while they own Chametz, over Belosa say they're in violation of Belosa say. Imasai, when is this so? Bisman Shula Shochet Lazarek Lechem Nechabro. At a time when the Chametz belongs to the person who slaughters it, the person who throws the blood, or one of the members of the group. If someone at the end of the world has chametz, that doesn't impact us in any way. It's only the people involved. Okay. Now the brisa elaborates, and this is the support for Papa. Whether it's the slaughterer, whether it's the person who throws the blood, or the person who puts the sacrificial parts on the mizbeach. If any of those people own the chametz, then they are liable. And that's exactly what Papa said. The person who puts the sacrificial parts on the mizbeach, that person is going to be chayav for owning chametz while the carbon is brought. And then the brisa continues, and these last words are going to start off a new conversation. A person who performs malika on a bird on the 14th of Nisan, while they own chametz, over below klum, there is no violation. So what is malika? Malika means the way they slaughtered a bird in the Beis Hamikdash was not with a knife. I know this is going to sound weird to some of you, but basically they would take their thumb and the nail of their thumb and put it in the bird's neck, and that's how they slaughtered the animal. Okay, that's what they did. The bottom line is that we're being taught over here that a person who goes ahead, the Kohen who goes ahead and brings a bird offering on Erev Pesach, and a bird offering would be the more typical offering that's brought on Erev Pesach, because remember, bird offering is used in one of the typical offerings that are brought to be mitahir, someone who is tameh. So you bring a bird offering, the person who does malika, the Kohen who goes ahead and slaughters that bird, the person who does so and they own chametz, they are not going to be chayav for owning chametz. Okay, let's keep that line in mind. We have a contradiction. Here is a new brisa. Hashochet pesach chametz. Person who slaughters the Korban Pesach over the chametz, over below to say they transgress their prohibition because they own chametz while slaughtering the Korban Pesach. Omer afatamid. Not only the Korban Pesach, but also if you bring the Korban Tamid, if the Kohen brings the Korban Tamid and they own chametz at the time, they are going to be liable. Amru lo amru ela pesach levad. This prohibition was stated only regarding the Korban Pesach. Okay, so you have Tanakama saying it's only for the Korban Pesach you own chametz. You have Yehuda saying it's also if you bring the Korban Tamid. Says the brisa further. When is this so? This is only so when the chametz belongs to either the person who slaughters it, the person who throws the blood, or the person, one of the members of the group. Okay. However, if there's a person at the end of the world who has chametz, we don't care about that person. Okay, whether the person is, and here's the key line: whether it's the person who slaughters, whether the person who throws the blood, or the person who performs malik on a bird offering, or a person who sprinkles the blood is chayav. So you see, okay, we're going to come back to that question, but the point is, you see from here that a person who does malika, who owns chametz, is liable. In the first brisa it said if you do malika you're not liable. This brisa says you are liable. Say a person does kamitza from mincha. A mincha offering is a flour offering. A person, what they would do is the kamitza means they take like their like a fistful of flour and they put that on this mizbeach. That person who does that and they own chametz, you are not going to be in violation of this negative prohibition. Hamakter saying Hamakter saying murim ino over say. Then this last line says the person who burns the sacrificial parts of the Korban Pesach and they own chametz, you do not transgress the negative commandment. So that's also a contradiction, because in brisa number 1 it said that a person who brings the sacrificial parts and they own chametz, then you are in violation. So we have two contradictions. So kasha malika amalika. So 64a1. We have a contradiction because in the first brisa it said you are not going to be liable for doing malika on Erev Pesach, and the second brisa says you are going to be liable. And kasha the first brisa says that the person, the Kohen, who goes ahead and burns the innards on the mizbeach, the sacrificial parts of the mizbeach, they own chametz, they are going to be liable. The second brisa says you are not. Well, ask the Gemara, wait a second. Tikshila, according to your understanding, Tikshila higufa, the brisa itself, the second brisa itself is hard to understand. Diktani lo amra el pesach levad. For first it taught that the prohibition was stated only regarding the Pesach, okay? So it began by saying that it's only true for the Korban Pesach. And then later on the Brisa, it said that whether a person slaughters, whether a person throws the blood, so far so good, or a person does malika on a bird and it sprinkles blood. Okay, so wait a second. If we're talking about Korban Pesach, if you're saying it only is applicable for Korban Pesach, there's no malika for Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is an animal, is a lamb, is right? So malika is only done for a bird. So the Brisa first begins by saying it's only Pesach, and then it continues and talks about malika for a bird. So Gemara says, Rav Shimon. The Brisa, both the first and second Brisa, are both Rav Shimon. Now, who's Rav Shimon? Rav Shimon taught us earlier, and we're going to go a little bit more into his opinion over here, that although we had an opinion in our Mishnah which said that a person who owns chametz on Pesach or Erev Pesach, the only thing you're going to be liable for is you bring the Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach and you own chametz, that's when you're liable. And we had Rav Yehuda said also Korban Tamid. Rav Shimon comes along and says it's going to be true for other karbanos as well. We'll see, not always, but certain times you're going to be chayiv if you own other karbanos, and we'll see what the sources for that is. And now we explain the Brisa. Malika Lokasha. So there is no difficulty between the first and second Brisa because Kambar Ba'asar, the first Brisa, which says that if you do Malika on Erev Pesach while you own chametz, you are not going to be chayiv. That is on Erev Pesach. Why? Erev Pesach, you're only, because an Erev Pesach is not yet Pesach, and therefore if you bring another carbon, let's say you bring a carbon chatas and you own chametz, you are not going to be chayiv. However, you bring another carbon on Pesach itself, let's say on Chol, you will be chayiv. Okay, and that's Rav Shimon's view, who says if you bring another carbon, a good carbon, on another day of Pesach, then you own chametz, you are going to be in violation of that prohibition. We'll see the sources soon. Rav Shimon okay, both Brises again are Rav Shimon, Aktar, and Amud. There's no difficulty between the first Brise and the second Brise regarding the sacrificial parts. Why tonight disputes? Because everyone agrees when it comes to slaughtering, that everyone agrees if you own chametz, you are going to be in violation. There's an argument within the view of Rav Shimon as to what he holds. One opinion holds that he compares slaughtering to putting the food on the sacrificial parts on the mizbeach, and therefore you're going to be, if you own chametz, for either person, Kohen who owns chametz who does the slaughtering, or the Kohen who owns chametz and puts the parts on the mizbeach, in either case you're going to be chayiv. And then there's another opinion that says no, slaughtering yes, but other parts, but putting the sacrificial parts on the mizbeach, there is no comparison between the two, and therefore you're not going to be chayiv in that case. Okay, now the Gemara is going to analyze the three different opinions. Rav Yehuda Omer af hatamid. Rav Yehuda says that you're going to be, that again, the pasuk says explicitly in the Torah that if you own chametz while you bring the Korban Pesach, you are going to be chayiv. That's the simple read of the pasuk. Rav Yehuda comes along and says af hatamid. So too, for if you bring the Korban Tamid, the Kohen brings the Korban Tamid and he owns chametz, he's going to be in violation. Where does this come from? My tamid Rav Yehuda. What is the reason for Rav Yehuda? Amar lach zivchi. The pasuk says that if you slaughter my sacrifice over chametz. And again, the simple explanation over here is we're talking about the Korban Pesach. However, why is it called my sacrifice? So zevach hamiyuchali, the Brisa explains that it's something which that it's a sacrifice that belongs to Hashem. What does that mean? In my new Talmud, it's referring to the Korban Tamid, because in the Korban Tamid it says it refers to the Korban Tamid as my sacrifice. My sacrifice. So for whatever reason, by the Korban Tamid refers to as my sacrifice, and therefore by Korban Pesach, the fact that it doesn't just say by bringing the sacrifice on Pesach, it says my sacrifice. It alludes to the fact that we're talking about the Korban Pesach. Okay. We're talking about not only the Korban Pesach, we're also talking about the Korban Tamid. Okay, so that's Rav Yehuda's source, the fact that the Torah goes out of its way to call it my sacrifice. Rav Shimon Omer HaPesach Rabba Asar. Rav Shimon says like this: on the 14th, if you bring another Korban and you own chametz, you're not going to be chayiv. If you come on another day and you bring another Korban on another day, you are going to be, and you own chametz, you are going to be chayiv. So Rav Shimon includes not only the Korban Pesach, not only the Korban Tamid, includes all karbanos. Where does he get this from? My Tamid Rav Shimon points out, doesn't say zivchi once, which as Rav Yehuda points out, that includes Korban Tamid. Rather, it says it twice. So kribe zevach zevachai. Okay, read it, a sacrifice, my sacrifices. Okay, so other sacrifices are going to be included. So why does the Torah separate them from one another? And it doesn't say my sacrifices. When there is a Pesach sacrifice, on the day, on Erev Pesach, when you're supposed to bring the Korban Pesach, if you bring another Korban, then you are not going to be liable on those days. However, the opposite is when there is no Pesach sacrifice, meaning during the rest of Pesach, you're going to be liable for bringing other types of offerings. So basically, Rav Shimon learns from the fact that it says twice to distinguish. On Erev Pesach, when it's the day to bring a Korban Pesach, then you're going to only be liable and you own a chametz, you're going to be liable if you bring the Korban Pesach and you own chametz. But if you bring another Korban, you are not, even though you're not supposed to own chametz at that point, Erev Pesach, nonetheless, you're not going to be liable for bringing the Korban while owning chametz. However, it's during the rest of Pesach, when there is no Korban Pesach, because it's too late, then you are going to be liable, then you're going to be And the rest of the Pesach, if you bring another korban, you're going to be liable for bringing that other korban if you still own chametz. Okay, says the Gemara further, Uvamoid lishmo pater v'lushlo lishmo eno pater. So the Mishnah concluded by telling us, in Rav Shimon's view, that that a person slaughters korban Pesach during Yom Tov. Okay, so if it's done for its own sake, if it's done lishma, then you are exempt. Why would you be exempt? Because like this. Let's say you have a korban Pesach, okay? So it's Erev Pesach, you're supposed to bring the korban. You forgot, whatever, I don't know, something happened, you didn't bring your korban on Erev Pesach. So what happens? Now it's this Cholamayid, and you go ahead and you're on a Cholamayid, you say, I'm bringing our korban for korban Pesach. That's meaningless. You didn't bring a korban. So since it's completely invalid korban, therefore you're not going to be liable, and you happen to be a guy who also owns chametz, you're not going to be liable for bringing a korban Pesach while owning chametz because it's not really a korban. It's not really a korban. Okay. However, if let's say it's not Pesach anymore, it's not Erev Pesach anymore, sorry, and it's Cholamayid, and you bring the korban Pesach, but it's not for tzei, you do it shelo lishma, you're saying, I'm not bringing the korban Pesach, I'm bringing it for a shlamim, I'm bringing it for something else, then you are going to be liable. Why? Because since if I bring my korban Pesach for the sake of a shlamim on Cholamayid, then it's a good korban shlamim, so therefore it's a good korban. If it's a good korban, Shimon holds, and you own chametz, then you're going to be liable for bringing a good korban, while you own chametz. So Gemara makes the following inference. Time of the shelo lishma. The reason that you're going to be liable during Cholamayid is because you brought it not for its own sake, explicitly not for its own sake. Stama pater. But if you slaughter it during Cholamayid, you have a korban Pesach from Erev Pesach, for whatever reason you didn't slaughter it, you bring it on Cholamayid, and you do not have any intention, then you would not be liable. Am I asking, why is it so? Pesach b'shem osashana shlam have. Don't we say that if a person goes ahead and brings a korban Pesach on another day of the year, you have a korban Pesach, you designate as a korban Pesach, you didn't bring an Erev Pesach, you bring it another day of the year, automatically becomes a shlamim. So shmavs mina Pesach b'shem osashana ba'yakira. The implication of our Mishnah by saying that I have to specifically have an intention of shelo lishma in order to make it a valid korban means if I just bring it stam without any intention, then it doesn't become a korban. It doesn't become a shlamim. I have to go out of my way to say it's no longer korban Pesach. It's now going to be a shlamim. Otherwise, it would still be it would not be a valid korban. So this actually is a debate later on about whether or not you need to do what is called akira. Basically, if you have something which is designated korban Pesach and you bring it not for the sake, you just bring it not on Erev Pesach, does it automatically make it a shlamim, or do you have to say it is no longer korban Pesach and then slaughter it? So this Mishnah seems to imply that you have to actually be okered. You have to go out of your way to say it is no longer korban Pesach, and that's the only way to do it. So the Gemara says no, don't bring proof from there because there was a group of rabbis talking, and it came out of the assembly of scholars. They said the following explanation: let's get a case where you designate a korban Pesach, and Erev Pesach comes along, and all the people who are supposed to be part of this korban, they all become tamei. They came into contact with someone who's dead, and therefore what's going to happen? Go into my mace, and therefore this korban was pushed off to Pesach Sheni. In that case, that animal is much more designated than your regular korban Pesach, which you just missed the boat. In other words, not missed the boat, missed the date. In other words, like this. In that particular case, you have a korban Pesach which was designated for Erev Pesach, and then they all got tamei. So what happens? You say, okay, we'll wait with this animal, we'll bring it a month later on Pesach Sheni. So this animal, if I want to now go ahead and bring this animal as a shlamim, I have to be oker. I have to say it is no longer korban Pesach, and then I can bring it as a shlamim, I can bring it as a non-korban Pesach. But if we're talking about a case where it's a regular korban Pesach, and the guy just spaced out and didn't bring it Erev Pesach, and now we're on bringing it as a shlamim, so it's not as Pesachdik. It's not like as designated for Pesach that I have to go out of my way to be oker to say it is no longer Pesach because there's no reason to assume it is. It's already past Pesach. But in the case where everyone became tamei there and you're waiting for Pesach Sheni, that's already much more designated as a Pesach, and therefore you'd have to do much more to break it free from that. Okay, that is the end of the Gemara. Now we're going to go into a beautiful Mishnah which describes the process of the korban Pesach on Erev Pesach. There are three groups of people, as we'll see how it worked. But basically, there are three groups of people who went into the Azar, into the courtyard to bring the korban Pesach. Shnever v'shachtu is so-called Kahal Das Yisrael. The pasuk says the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel to slaughter it. Kahal v'ed of Yisrael. It says assembly, congregation in Israel. Each term represents a group of people. So there's three groups. How does it work? Nichas Kas Rishon. The first group goes into the Azar, and Ismail Azar, the courtyard fills up. Nalu Das Azar, they close the gates of the courtyard. Taku Riva Taku, they sounded the Tkiya, Trua Tkiya, and Akonim Umd B'Shuras Shuras. The Akonim stood rows upon rows, 2 rows. Uvidem B'Ziche Kesef B'Ziche Esav, and their hands were silver bowls and gold bowls. Okay, Shura Shkula Kesef Kesef. 1 row was fully silver, and the other row was all gold. They never mixed up in gold and silver bowls. They just went straight, gold on the gold row and silver on silver. The bowls not have wide bases, so that they wouldn't put the bowls down by mistake and the blood would congeal. Okay, so we're about to see, let's go into more detail and then we'll explain. Shachar Yisrael, the Yisrael would slaughter the carbon. The Kohen would receive the blood in a bowl. Then the Kohen would hand it on. It's like a fire brigade, right? So basically you have the Kohen, Yisrael slaughters the carbon Pesach. Kohen catches it in his bowl, his gold bowl, let's say. He passes it on to the next Kohen passes on to the next Kohen, next one to the next one. Umekabel es hamale umachzer es aregon. Okay, and then while that's happening, as we're about to see, they accept, let's say I'm a Kohen, I take the full bowl, hand it to the next Kohen who takes the full bowl, hands to the next Kohen a full bowl. As we mentioned earlier, it doesn't have a flat bottom because if it did, there's a concern. A Kohen may put it down, the blood's going to get congealed if it's not moving. So it's important that it keeps moving. But if it had a flat bottom, then it could get congealed. So they keep on passing it on. Okay, at the same time, there's going to be bowls going back the other way because as soon as that blood gets to the end, then they're going to start handing it back empty. So the bowls are going in two directions. It looked like you just saw like gold. You just saw gold and just saw silver, just like this line of gold, a line of silver. There's these beautiful descriptions that we have historically of like what it looked like. It looked like incredible of this everything flying, like going back and forth. It was amazing. And Kohen Akarva till Mizbeach, the Kohen who was close to the Mizbeach, Zorko Zrika Achas Ganagay, he would throw one toss. The last Kohen, the Mizbeach, would take it and throw it to the Mizbeach, and then that is the Zrika that's needed. Then the first group left, the second group entered. The second group left, the third group entered. Like procedure of the first one, so to the procedure, but the same procedure for the second and third. They would read Hallel. While the Korban Pesach was being brought, they would read Hallel. If they finished the Hallel while the people were still in that first group, they'd start again. And if they completed, they would start again a third time, even though they never had to start a third time. In other words, by the time they finished it, saying it twice, that was always enough. Yehuda Omer, the third group was always small. The third group is very small, and therefore that group never reached even the line of Hafti Yishmash Hashem. They would already be finished even before they even made it through halfway of the Hallel. Okay, of the first Hallel. Okay, so right, for the third group was so small they never even got through a full Hallel. Weekday procedure was the same. Same as Shabbos. Except that the Kohanim would rinse the courtyard floor, but the Chacham did not like this. How would they rinse the courtyard floor? There was a stream that went through the courtyard of the Zara, the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, and what the Kohanim would do is they would plug up the stream, and what that would do is it caused the water to rise. It would fill the floor of the Beis Hamikdash, which remember was filled with blood at this point because there's so much blood flying everywhere, and then it would pick up the blood, and then they pull the plug out, all the water would seep out. We'll see why they did it and why the Chacham did not like it. We'll come back there. Yehuda Omer, Kosei Mali Midam Taroves. So in addition to that, when it would start filling up with water, they would pick up a cup and filled with a mix of all the bloods together, and they would pour it on the mizbech, throw it towards the mizbech. We'll see why they that Yehuda said that was a thing that they did, and what would be the value of doing that. But again, the Chacham did not agree with him that they did this. Okay, how they suspend and flay the slaughtered animal? Oh, right, they have to take off the skin. Iron hooks were fixed in the walls and to the pillars of the butchering place, in which they suspended and flayed the sacrifices. Okay, so basically they had to hang the animals by the walls and pillars. They had these hooks and they hung them there. If there was no room, because again there's so many karbanos, they eventually ran out of room of hooks. So there were thin, smooth staffs there. I take a staff, I put on my shoulder and your shoulder. Okay, we stand opposite each other, and we suspend the animal from there, and then they would flay it from where it's standing. Okay, for the Yezer Omer, Abba Asar of the 14th, we're on Sanot Beis. Shechal Yis fell on Shabbos. So there, according to Rashi, elsewhere, not here, the sticks were muksa, and therefore instead of putting on sticks, maniach yadol kesef chavero, we would put our hands. I put my hands on my friend's shoulder, and we would go like this, and basically in doing so, we would create our own like sticks, basically, and we would hang the animal on our hands. Right, kind of not something we would necessarily do nowadays, but. They had to hang the animals, and so that's what they would do. That's where they hold the animal up by putting their hands on their friend's shoulder to give him strength, and then they put the animal over the person's hand, and then the other person would go ahead and flay the animal, the hand of his fellow on his shoulder. Okay, and then they would suspend and flay the Pesach. So basically, they both put hands on each other, and in doing so, they'd have like a strong, support. Put the animal there, and then they would flay the thing. And Murav, okay, they tore it open and removed the sacrificial parts. Instead of Megas, they put it in a bowl. Then they'd burn all those parts on the Mizbeach. On Shabbos, the first group went out of the courtyard, and they remained on the Harabayas. Why did they do so? Because they couldn't take their animals, they couldn't carry their animals. There's no Eruv, it's Shabbos, they're not allowed to carry their animal. and therefore they would remain on the Temple Mount. The second group would remain in a place called the Chel. The third group would remain in the courtyard. When it was Bantei Shabbos, Yatsu, Vitzalos, Pesachim, they all went out. They roasted the Pesach offerings, and all was good. Okay. Basically, again, they couldn't carry because it's Shabbos, but then they would start to carry as soon as Shabbos was over. Have a great day. We will pick up Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow.